Hello and welcome back. So glad you've tuned in. So today, as we know, Prince Harry is making history. It has been more than 130 years since a senior member of the royal family has given evidence in court. And today, the cross-examination of Prince Harry has begun at the High Court in London as he's giving his evidence in this landmark trial against the Daily Mirror's publishers over alleged unlawful information gathering. So let's get into the main points of the day. So Andrew Green KC, representing MGN, began his cross-examination of the Duke by saying, quote, "I'm sure your legal team has explained to you how this process works. One of the things I'm going to be doing is taking you through various newspaper articles, some of which are the subject of your claim. I entirely appreciate that you have lived a lifetime of tabloid press intrusion and that having to be asked questions on such matters can only be unpleasant," end quote. The barrister also asked the Duke to let him know if he wanted to take a break at any point or for any reason, and also to say if he found any question, quote, "objectionable." So he also started off by apologizing to the Duke of Sussex in person on behalf of MGN, repeating the publisher's unreserved apology in quotes to him at the outset of the trial for one instance of unlawful activity. He said, quote, "MGN unreservedly apologizes to you for that. It should never have happened and it will never happen again," end quote. Mr. Green told Harry that, quote, "You will be entitled to and will receive a more extensive apology," in quotes, if in fact MGN was responsible for any further acts of unlawful information gathering. So that's just kicking that off. So a lot of revelations have been had. In his written evidence statement, the Duke of Sussex said alleged unlawful actions of MGN journalists affected every area of his life. He said, quote, "My voicemails would include incredibly private and sensitive information about my relationships, my operational security and that of my family, my work both in the army and as a senior member of the royal family, and also any plans I had made for my time off, including holidays and downtime with friends. They would also include incredibly private and sensitive information about those with whom I associated," end quote. So he talked about the fact that he would, on multiple occasions, hear a voicemail for the first time that wasn't new, but he could not remember thinking that that was particularly unusual. He would chalk it down to a technical glitch as mobile phones were still relatively new. And he thought that perhaps after having drinks the night before, he had forgotten that he had listened to it. So he said that, quote, "The fact that the defendants, journalists, and those instructed on their behalf were listening in to private and sensitive voicemails at the level of detail discussed in the statement rather suggests that they could have heard anything and everything." He went on to say, quote, "This not only creates a huge amount of distress, but presented very real security concerns for not only me, but also everyone around me. I would say their actions affected every area of my life," end quote. He also talked about the fact that in a witness statement, he described his grandmother, the Queen. While he was on a trip to Australia in his gap year in 2003, she had secretly sent one of her aides to stay nearby without Harry knowing in case he needed support because of press coverage. So that was a very touching moment. So you can see he said that the Queen was so on his side. He went on to say, quote, "Every time I was getting off a plane or jumping in a car, I was looking in the rear view mirror, so to speak. I came to expect to be followed and papped by someone hiding in the bush somewhere. Everything felt as though I was under 24-hour surveillance," end quote. So he talked about the hostility that he's felt towards the press. He said that it was there since he was born, in quotes. And he went on to say that he had a long-standing, in quotes, hostility towards the media when he was asked by Mr. Green. And he was asked if this hostility had predated the discovery that unlawful methods had been used by some of the press. To which he replied, quote, "Yes, because the unlawful methods were hidden from me as well as everyone else," end quote. He went on to say, quote, "It certainly shocked me," end quote. So he talked about the tabloid behavior being utterly vile. He went on to say, this is so powerful. In his witness statement, he said, quote, "In my experience, as a member of the royal family, each one of us gets cast into a specific role by the tabloid press. You start off as a blank canvas while they work out what kind of person you are and what kind of problems and temptations you might have. They then start to edge you towards playing the role or roles that suit them best, and which sells as many newspapers as possible, especially if you are, quote, spare to the heir. You are then either the playboy prince, in quotes, or the failure, in quotes, or the dropout, in quotes, or in my case, the, quote, thicko, the cheat, the underage drinker, the irresponsible drug taker, end quote. The list goes on. And he went on to say, quote, "As a teenager and in my early 20s, I ended up feeling as though I was playing up to a lot of the headlines and stereotypes that they wanted to pin on me, mainly because I thought that if they were printing this rubbish about me and people were believing it, I might as well do the crime, so to speak. It was a downward spiral whereby the tabloids would constantly try to coax me, a quote, damaged young man, into doing something stupid that would make a good story and sell lots of newspapers. Looking back on it now, such behavior on their part is utterly vile," end quote. So this was another important standout. In response to questions over an article published by the Daily Mirror in 1996, which mentioned his feelings about the then Prince Charles and the late Princess of Wales's divorce, he answered, quote, "Like most children, I took their divorce badly. I don't think the quote is a guess. I think specific information was found out. I wouldn't say it was an assumption," end quote. He added that the Mirror article was, quote, "littered with elements of private information." Mr. Green asked whether that information was likely to have come from phone hacking, and the Duke responded, quote, "The article itself and almost, if not most of the elements in it were intrusive, and the journalist himself had no legitimacy to put it into a newspaper," end quote. So they also talked about Diana's visit to Eton, and they brought up the fact that the Press Association had reported that Princess Diana was due to visit the prince for his 12th birthday at Ludgrove School before any of the Mirror titles did. So the Duke said, quote, "I wasn't aware of that," and Mr. Green pointed out that Diana's spokeswoman had confirmed her appearance to PA. So Prince Harry responded, quote, "But the information there is vastly different to the information in the article itself," end quote. He told the court that observers coming to his school to, quote, "catch a glimpse of his mother did not happen often." And he also said, "I can't remember anyone being there on my birthday," end quote. So he was asked about the paranoid, in quotes, claims. So Mr. Green, who of course is representing MGN, asked the Duke, quote, how he became hugely paranoid if he didn't read the articles. But Harry said, "Many of the articles I did read, the vast majority were attributed to a pal, a friend, a source, an onlooker, which actually creates more suspicion about where the articles come from," end quote. He also added, quote, "As a child growing up and throughout my teenage years, I was under press invasion for most of my life up until this day," end quote. Also, this was quite standout. The Duke of Sussex suggested that stories containing rumors that he was fathered by Army Major James Hewitt were designed to oust him from the royal family. That was part of a blistering 55-page witness statement. Prince Harry revealed he had spent years believing that the, quote, "numerous stories focused on a rumor that James Hewitt, an army major, was his biological father. He only learned that his mother met Mr. Hewitt after he was born in 2014, he said. So the story was published in The People in December 2002 concerning a plot to steal a sample of his DNA to test his parentage. And Prince Harry said, quote, "At the time when I was 18 years old, I had lost my mother just 6 years earlier. Stories such as this felt very damaging and very real to me. They were hurtful, mean, and cruel, and I was always left questioning the motives behind these stories." Quote, "Were the newspapers keen to put doubts into the minds of the public so that I might be ousted from the royal family?" End quote. So that was quite touching. It shows how even in those, formative years, how such stories keeping on being rehashed in the press and being in that public sphere were affecting his life. So that was quite powerful. So he also goes on to detail more of the press intrusion. Prince Harry explained how in a written statement he began to suspect he was a victim of phone hacking. Quote, "The tabloids would routinely publish articles about me that were often wrong, but interspersed with snippets of truth, which I now think were most likely gleaned from voicemail interception and or unlawful information gathering." Quote, "This created an alternative and distorted version of me and my life to the general public," end quote. So the Duke of Sussex was asked about an article about him having Sunday lunch in a gastro pub in London's Fulham Road. It was put to him that there were other ways that his whereabouts could have been known to the newspaper that weren't through unlawful information gathering. To which he answered, quote, "I do not believe that as a witness it is my job to deconstruct the article or be able to answer which parts are unlawfully obtained and which aren't. I think the journalists themselves should be doing that," end quote. So the article in the Daily Mirror's 3 a.m. celebrity gossip column from September 2011 detailed 2 lunch dates. The Daily Mirror said that a photographer had been tipped off about that pub visit and followed it up. The story added that the prince had, quote, insisted the week before that his bodyguard join him for a pizza. In the prince's witness statement, it said, quote, "I don't know how anyone would have known I was at this particular pub at this particular time in order to be there taking photographs of me," end quote. He went on to say, quote, "I always found these kinds of coincidences," in quotes, "to be odd," end quote. Quote, "I now understand that the bylined journalists and the 3 a.m. desk as a whole are well known in this litigation for being involved in phone hacking and other forms of unlawful information gathering," end quote. "I'm unsure of how the defendant's journalists could have been aware of any private conversation between me and my bodyguard," end quote. Very expertly highlighting in that there is no way that they would have gotten that information from his bodyguard, because that would be implying he would be talking to the press about Harry's security. So that, of course, would put the Mirror in a very interesting situation as they have to explain how they came up with that story, right? So Prince Harry also decried the fact that some of the journalists who were part of this complaint were not appearing at the High Court. He also strongly said that people had to hold them to account. And he said this, quote, "Although I understand that they are not obliged to come and give evidence, I find it absolutely appalling that these people refuse to do so or subject themselves to cross-examination, especially as I have been forced to relive a horrific period in my life in order to prepare this witness statement, and will be only too pleased to subject myself to cross-examination in court." He said their cowardice speaks volumes, and I don't understand how they are allowed to hide. In another impactful statement, he said this, quote, "I may not have a role within the institution, but as a member of the British royal family and as a soldier upholding important values, I feel there is a responsibility to expose this criminal activity in the name of public interest," end quote. What a powerful statement, so full of conviction. If this was scripted, you can just almost hear the swell of the score in the background and the cheers of applause as people are just rooting for this guy to win. Share your thoughts on that impactful statement. So there was also that piece about him getting a sporting injury at school. In his witness statement, he said he had seen the documentation from the case that suggested the reporter bylined on that story, Jane Kerr, had previously instructed a private investigator. Quote, "The level of detail is just surprising, as is the specific comment made by the defendant's journalists that I had been told by the doctors not to play football for a few weeks," in quotes. In another 2001 story, the Sunday Mirror detailed potential damage to the young prince's spine from playing polo, information he said he did not share with classmates. In his statement, he said, quote, "It's not at all clear to me how the defendant got this kind of information," end quote. So I'll also summarize here when he talked about how his mother had come to visit him for that 20 minutes. The Daily Mirror said that the information came from reports in the public domain including unnamed witnesses on a nearby footpath. But in his statement, Harry said, quote, "This section of the article makes no sense to me. It's my recollection that when my mother collected or visited me at school, she would be literally in and out of the front door of the school. While there is a public footpath next to the school, I'm not sure how anyone would have been able to see my mother from there and establish that she was upset, or why anyone would have stayed there long enough to be able to say she was only inside for 20 minutes, end quote. So as a by the way, speaking of those who were actually in the courtroom, they talked about Prince Harry's disposition as the trial started. And this was a quote from BBC. They talked about the fact that Prince Harry managed to get a few jokes in. He said, "You've got me doing a workout," in quotes. And this was when he was struggling with the many heavy bundles of legal documents being handed to him in court time and time again. And they said that he had been speaking quietly to the court and a little hesitantly at first, sitting in the witness box with a computer screen in front of him, but he seemed to be warming up, throwing in jokes and pushing back on the Mirror Group's newspaper's barrister. So it's good to see that he is bringing his own personality to the stand, which is very important, by the way. I think a lot of you who also, as an aside, followed the Johnny Depp case, it matters quite a bit how you are in the witness box, the kind of disposition you have and your comportment and the way you communicate with the barrister, with the judge, with the court, especially now that in this case there is no jury. You know, he has to have some kind of rapport with the judge as well. So that's quite good for him. Someone also pointed out that him being in the army, they go through grueling training whereby they are put through some type of questioning that is quite aggressive. So I think that's going to help him in this. So that was an aside. Getting back to the trial, they go on to talk about, in his witness statement, he talked about getting his first phone when he went to Eton that was given to him by the royal aides, and he said it became crucial to his daily life. He said, quote, "I was very heavily involved with various commitments. I would constantly be leaving and receiving voicemails and text messages, which was much less common back then," end quote. He said it was his main means of communicating with his family, including his mother, his girlfriend at the time, his friends, members of the royal household, and those he was working with. So the court moved on to the 7th article in question, a Daily Mirror article titled, quote, "Harry's Cocaine, Ecstasy and GHB Parties," end quote. That was written by Jane Kerr on January the 14th, 2002. Prince Harry in his claim had said he doesn't know where the words, quote, "worried sick" could have come from in relation to his father's response to his drug taking. The Duke told Mr. Green, quote, "I don't think it's my role to deconstruct articles, as I said before," and pressed again by Mr. Green about the fact that the information was reported elsewhere first. Harry said, quote, "When an article comes out, in my experience, journalists are under a huge amount of pressure to deliver the goods," end quote. Asked whether the article itself or the breaking of the story impacted him, he told the court, quote, "The headline itself is enough to create judgment. The headline itself, let alone the article, had a profound impact on me because even though I didn't read it, there are people around me who would have," end quote. Harry said, quote, "Eton had a zero drugs policy in place and I was extremely worried I was going to be expelled," end quote. Discussing the January 2002 article, Harry said, quote, "What's notable to me in this article when reading it now are the quotes attributed to my father, including that he was, quote, worried sick and hugely relieved, in quotes, when I told him I had only used cannabis." So the Duke of Sussex went on to say, quote, "My father didn't make any direct comment to the press. A statement was made by the palace in response to the News of the World story. This was handled by a tight, small team internally, so it's not clear to me where the defendant's journalists could possibly have obtained these quotes from," end quote. He added, quote, "These articles were also written at a time when there had been an agreement between the press and the royal family following the death of my mother that my brother and I should be able to go through our education without constant scrutiny and interruption. It seemed to me that there was never any let-up in the press coverage of every detail of my childhood by the defendant's journalists and others," end quote. And there was a great quote here by Harry where When the barrister put to him that it was a matter of public interest, Prince Harry replied, quote, "There's a difference between public interest and what interests the public," end quote. Wow, what a mic drop moment. So as I said, Prince Harry, he was truly getting more comfortable in the box. So share your thoughts on this as well. I would love to know your thoughts. And in his statement, Prince Harry said that journalists would illegally obtain information about his former girlfriend, Chelsea Davies' flights to the UK to see him. Quote, "I walked into the arrivals hall with a baseball cap on and immediately spotted 5 separate paparazzi sitting on benches with cameras and bags, their hands inside rucksacks and everyone else looking at me," end quote. He went on to say, quote, "I remember that someone was videoing me with one of those tiny little cameras between their legs. I recall thinking, how on earth did they know I was going to be there? But now it's obvious. Here were 5 big, burly, and dodgy-looking men with their hands in their pockets or in rucksacks and satchels in a busy public place. My security and I simply couldn't know whether they were reaching for a camera or drawing some kind of weapon," end quote. So he also talks about how their actions would affect every area of his life. He said that he experienced a huge amount of paranoia. Quote, "I would become immediately suspicious of anyone that was named in a story about me, whether it was Mark Dyer, Tiggy, or her brother Harry, for example. I felt I couldn't trust anybody, which was an awful feeling for me, especially at such a young age." So this is also another standout moment. And by the way, thank you for listening to me. I wanted to give you guys these truths unfiltered because Prince Harry taking on these tabloids is a huge and a very bold step for him. And we want to be very leery of spin in the media, trying to put Harry down, trying to focus on specific statements and making those headlines and drawing people's attention away from that which really counts. So thank you for listening through. So this is a very important part where he talks about his marriage to Meghan. He says, this is in his witness statement, quote, "Whenever I got into a relationship, they were very keen to report the details, but would then very quickly seek to try and break it up by putting up as much strain on it and creating as much distrust as humanly possible. This twisted objective is still pursued to this day, even though I am now married. I simply don't understand and never have how the inner private details of my relationships could have anything to do with the well-being of society or the running of the country and therefore be in the public interest," end quote. So this is also standout. He talked about Piers Morgan. He said this, "The thought of Piers Morgan and his band of journalists earwigging into my mother's private and sensitive messages in the same way as they have me, and then having given her a, quote, nightmare time 3 months prior to her passing in Paris, makes me feel physically sick and even more determined to hold those responsible, including Mr. Morgan, accountable for their vile and entirely unjustified behavior," end quote. He went on to say, "As a consequence of me bringing my Mirror Group claim, both myself and my wife have been subjected to a barrage of horrific personal attacks and intimidation from Piers Morgan, who was the editor of the Daily Mirror between 1995 and 2004, presumably in retaliation and in the hope that I will back down before being able to hold him properly accountable for his unlawful activity towards both me and my mother during his editorship," end quote. So what a powerful statement that is by Prince Harry. As many have said, he is a man on a mission. Share your thoughts on that statement in the comment section. And share if these revelations give you some more perspective on Prince Harry's upbringing. And even though he has grown up in that whole privilege of being a prince with all the trappings that has, whether you can see from this perspective that his life has had a few challenges. Share your thoughts on that and keep it here for more updates. So thank you all for listening. I want to give a special shout out right now to a couple of supporters of this channel here. As always, a special thank you to you, Alima Zimmer. Thank you for your continued support for my work here on YouTube. It truly does mean so much. God bless you. Thank you, Leslie Ollerhead, for the ways you choose to engage on this channel. Thank you for your love and your giving and your generosity. God bless. A special thank you as well to those who support this channel through Patreon and through PayPal. A special thank you to Angel Watt, who gives to this channel so faithfully every month. Angel, I want to say that I truly do love you and appreciate and value you. Thank you for giving towards my work. And a special thank you as well to Martha Jones, who gives through PayPal as well. God bless you. I do appreciate you. I pray for God to bless you exceedingly abundantly above all you could ever ask or think. Thank you. Thank you. Once again, thank you to all who support this channel financially and keep it here for unbiased and unfiltered reporting on Prince Harry's legal action, as of course we are truly hoping for justice for him and for the claimants. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this one, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Click that subscribe button. It truly does help out the channel. If you want to watch more videos, click the links in the cards and at the end screens, and I will see you there. Thank you all for watching. Share your thoughts below and have a great day, and I will catch you in the next one. Have a blessed one.